Inside Rikers Island crime documentary full episodes. The Arrival. Don't just watch, dive in. Hit subscribe, leave your mark in the comments and stay locked in. Because once you step inside Rikers, there's no turning back. The sirens wailed across the East River Bridge as the bus rolled forward. A steel coffin on wheels carrying men whose lives had already been reduced to a number. The sky was low and gray, the kind of New York winter that froze the bones before you even realized it. Inside the bus, chains rattled against wrists and ankles. No one spoke. Every man aboard knew where they were headed: Rikers Island. For decades, Rikers has been a name whispered with fear, even among the hardest men on the street. A place where the city sends its broken, it's dangerous, and it's forgotten. A place where survival doesn't depend on the guards but on the gangs, the politics, and the strength you can project in a world that devours weakness. That morning, among the busload of men, one inmate sat unusually still. His name was Marcus Reaper Delgado. At 26, Delgado already carried a record that stretched across 3 boroughs: armed robbery, assault, narcotics trafficking. But it wasn't his rap sheet that made the guards uneasy, it was the silence. The Reaper had a reputation on the streets of Harlem, not for wild outbursts but for cold calculation. When Delgado moved, it was deliberate. When he spoke, people listened. And when bodies dropped, they often had his shadow nearby. Yet Delgado wasn't the only story unfolding on that bus. 2 rows behind him sat a kid who barely looked old enough to shave. His name was Anthony Vega, 19, arrested on a weapons charge after being caught in the wrong place with the wrong crew. He had no gang ties, no muscle, no reputation. The guards looked at him and saw fresh meat. The other inmates looked at him and saw something worse: an opportunity. The bus rumbled onto the bridge that connected Queens to the island, crossing the cold waters that separated the city from the fortress of concrete, steel, and razor wire ahead. The facility sprawled like a monster, 10 jails on a single island, each more notorious than the next. As the bus pulled into the intake gate, the men inside stiffened. They could hear the clank of the gates sliding shut behind them, one barrier at a time, sealing them off from the world. The air smelled of oil, metal, and fear. Inside the intake building, the men were stripped, searched, and processed. Mugshots flashed under harsh fluorescent lights. Fingerprints smeared across ink pads. Belongings reduced to plastic bags. For some, it was routine. For Vega, it was terror. He kept his head down, his heart pounding in his ears. But not Delgado. The Reaper's eyes scanned the room like a predator, measuring every face, every guard, every exit. He wasn't afraid. He was calculating. He knew Rikers wasn't just a jail. It was an ecosystem. And ecosystems had rules. Rules he intended not just to survive but to control. The first night on Rikers is designed to break you. The cells echo with the clanging of bars, the shouts of men testing each other, the distant sounds of fists meeting flesh. Vega lay awake on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, every sound making his pulse race. Across the tier, Delgado sat quietly in his cell, sharpening a toothbrush into something else entirely. Morning came with chaos. The dayroom filled with bodies, men playing cards, lifting weights, trading contraband, and staking out corners like wolves marking territory. Vega was pushed, mocked, tested. His fear painted him like a target. Delgado watched, expressionless, as 2 older inmates circled Vega like sharks. He knew how this story usually ended. The weak either bent to a gang or they broke. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of watching the kid crumble, Delgado stood. He crossed the room, his silence commanding more attention than any shouted threat. He stared down the 2 inmates, his presence heavy enough to make them hesitate. Without a word, they backed off. Vega exhaled, confused, shaken, alive. The Reaper had just made his first move. What the guards didn't know, what the city didn't know, was that Delgado's arrest hadn't been an accident. The whispers on the street said he wanted to be here. That Rikers wasn't a punishment, it was an opportunity. Inside, Delgado had connections waiting. A network of gang leaders, dirty corrections officers, and a pipeline that could move drugs, weapons, and money through the island like blood through veins. And Anthony Vega, the 19-year-old kid who didn't belong here, was about to find out that his fate was now tied to the Reaper's game. That night, Vega was summoned. 2 inmates pulled him into a corner of the dayroom, pressing him against the wall. One shoved a shank against his ribs. "You're with us now," the man hissed. "You're gonna hold this, you're gonna run this, and you're gonna shut your mouth. You hear me?" Before Vega could answer, Delgado appeared. Calm. Silent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply stared, the weight of his presence pressing into the men. The shank dropped. The men retreated. Vega, shaking, looked at Delgado with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Why?" he whispered. Delgado didn't answer. He just turned and walked away. Weeks passed. Vega found himself drawn deeper into Delgado's orbit. The Reaper never explained his actions, never offered comfort. But he protected Vega, and on Rikers that meant everything. In return, Vega became his eyes and ears. A runner. A messenger. A pawn in a much larger game. But something about Delgado's moves didn't add up. He wasn't just consolidating power, he was building something. Smuggling routes, alliances with rival gangs, even whispers of payoffs to certain guards. Rikers was supposed to break men. Delgado was turning it into his empire. The city outside remained oblivious. To them, Rikers was just another broken institution, a warehouse for criminals. But inside those walls, something darker was taking shape. Then came the night that changed everything. An officer found blood in one of the corridors near the chapel. A trail that led to a locked maintenance room. When the door was forced open, the guards recoiled. On the floor lay the body of an inmate, throat slashed, eyes wide open in terror. Beside him, scrawled in blood on the wall, was a single word: Reaper. Delgado was in his cell that night, calm, silent, and unshaken. Vega, however, wasn't. He knew what this meant. Someone was sending a message. And the game Delgado had been playing was about to erupt into violence that would engulf the entire island. The guards dragged Delgado from his cell, demanding answers. He said nothing. The other inmates whispered, rumors spreading like fire. Had Delgado killed the man? Or was someone framing him? For Vega, the question was even more terrifying. If Delgado hadn't done it, who had? And why use his name? But the real shock came the next morning. During a routine search of Vega's bunk, officers found a blood-stained shank hidden in his mattress. The guards didn't hesitate. Vega was cuffed, dragged across the tier, his protests drowned out by the jeers of inmates chanting for blood. He locked eyes with Delgado one last time as he was taken away. For the first time since arriving on Rikers, the Reaper spoke directly to him. "They set you up," Delgado said coldly. "Now it's your move." And with that, the door slammed shut. The trap. The sound of metal echoed through the tier as Anthony Vega's wrists were cuffed tight. His voice cracked as he shouted his innocence, but no one listened. To the officers, he was just another inmate caught with blood on his hands. To the other prisoners, he was a condemned man, guilty or not didn't matter. In Rikers, perception was reality. The march down the corridor felt like a funeral procession. Inmates banged on their cell bars, howling, mocking, predicting what would come next. Vega's mind raced. He had never killed anyone. He had never even seen the inside of a prison before this. Yet now he was being dragged toward solitary confinement, the kind of place that could break men twice his size and strength. They shoved him into the small, suffocating cell. The door slammed shut, the sound reverberating like a death knell. The concrete walls seemed to close in around him. He sat on the cold floor, his heart hammering in his chest. He replayed Delgado's words in his mind. "They set you up. Now it's your move." What did that mean? Who was they? And why him? Outside the solitary wing, chaos brewed. The discovery of the body in the chapel corridor had set the prison on fire. Rumors spread faster than the guards could stamp them out. Some swore the Reaper himself had killed the man and planted the shank to throw off suspicion. Others whispered it was a rival crew trying to provoke war. The word Reaper, scrawled in blood on the wall, gave the whispers teeth. But Delgado remained calm. Too calm. While the island boiled, he sat on his bunk in the dayroom like a man playing chess in his head, each move calculated, each silence deliberate. He had survived enough to know that panic was the enemy. Control the narrative and you control the prison. Detective Carla Mendez of the NYPD Gang Task Force received the call the next morning. A body on Rikers wasn't unusual. But this one was different. The victim, Rafael Torres, wasn't just another inmate. He was a known associate of the Dominican gang Trinitarios, a group already on edge inside the facility. His death, in such a brutal fashion, was a powder keg waiting to blow. Mendez had spent years chasing street gangs through the Bronx, Harlem, and Queens. She knew Delgado's name well. She had seen his rise from stick-up kid to crew leader, his reputation for precision violence, and his uncanny ability to evade convictions. Now he was on Rikers, and already a corpse was on the ground with his name written in blood. She arrived on the island that afternoon, her badge heavy on her chest as she stepped through the maze of gates and razor wire. The air inside smelled different, like sweat, bleach, and unspoken violence. Guards escorted her toward the chapel corridor, where the crime scene still buzzed with tension. Torres's body had already been removed, but the bloodstains remained, soaked deep into the concrete floor. The word Reaper glared from the wall, smeared and jagged. It was either a message or a frame job. Mendes studied it closely. The letters were sloppy, rushed. Whoever wrote it wasn't thinking about art, they were thinking about survival. A correctional captain handed her a folder. "We found the weapon in another inmate's bunk. Kid named Anthony Vega. Just came in a few weeks ago. 19. Barely knows how to walk the tier without getting chewed alive. But the shank had Torres's blood on it. Looks like an open and shut case." Mendes frowned. Nothing about it felt open or shut. Why would a 19-year-old kid, new to Rikers, risk everything by stabbing a veteran gang member? Why leave a trail of blood to a locked room? And why sign the crime scene with Delgado's nickname? It stank of orchestration. Meanwhile, in solitary Vega's panic was turning into something else: rage. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. Every sound outside his cell felt like a threat, every minute inside like torture. He replayed the moment the shank was found, trying to piece together how it got under his mattress. Only one conclusion made sense: someone had planted it. But why him? Why not frame someone else? Unless he was never meant to survive here at all. Unless this was all part of someone's plan. His thoughts circled back to Delgado. The man who had saved him. The man who had pulled him close. The man who had said only one thing before Vega's arrest: "Now it's your move." Was Delgado protecting him? Or was Delgado using him? Back in the dayroom, Delgado moved like a ghost. His allies whispered in corners, his enemies sharpened their knives, and the guards kept their distance. Nobody could read him, and that made him dangerous. Late one night, as the cells went dark, Delgado slipped a folded note through the bars to another inmate down the tier. The man unfolded it under the dim light. A simple message: "Tomorrow. Yard. Watch the kid." The game was in motion. The next morning, Vega was pulled from solitary for recreation. They escorted him to the yard, a caged-in concrete pit under the watchful eyes of both guards and predators. It was the first fresh air he'd breathed in days. But the moment his feet hit the ground, he knew something was wrong. Eyes followed him from every corner. Men whispered, pointed, laughed. He was the kid with blood on his hands, the one who killed a Trinitario. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. To them he was marked. As he moved toward the far corner, 3 inmates broke off from a group, their intent clear. Vega's stomach dropped. He had nowhere to run. Then suddenly Delgado appeared. "Come." Silent. He stepped between Vega and the 3 men. His eyes locked on them, unblinking. The yard fell silent. The men froze. Everyone on Rikers knew the Reaper didn't bluff. They backed off, muttering curses, retreating into the crowd. Vega, trembling, stared at Delgado. "Why?" he whispered again, his voice cracking. This time, Delgado answered. "Because you're mine now." The words weren't comfort. They were a sentence. Detective Mendes interviewed Vega later that afternoon. The kid sat across from her in a small, sterile room, his wrists chained to the table. His eyes were bloodshot, his body thin, but his voice carried desperation. "I didn't do it," he said. "I swear to God I didn't kill him. They planted it on me." "Who's they?" Mendes asked. Vega hesitated. He thought of Delgado. Of the look in his eyes. Of the way he had both saved him and chained him in the same breath. If he spoke Delgado's name, it could be his death sentence. "I don't know," Vega said finally. "But it wasn't me." Mendes studied him. She had seen liars. She had seen killers. Vega wasn't lying. He was terrified. Which meant he was either innocent, or too deep in something he couldn't escape. That night the island shook. Not literally, but in the way only Rikers could. Word spread that Torres's death was going unanswered, that the Trinitarios were demanding blood. Gangs aligned, knives sharpened, alliances tested. And in the shadows, Delgado moved pieces across a board only he could see. Night on Rikers had its own rhythm. The clang of doors locking, the distant hum of fluorescent lights, the muffled shouts of men who refused to surrender to silence. For Anthony Vega, it was the soundtrack of a nightmare. Every creak, every whisper in the dark felt like a countdown to something worse. He couldn't stop replaying Delgado's words, "Because you're mine now." They looped in his head like a curse. The Reaper had saved him twice, but not out of kindness. Vega was trapped in a game he didn't understand, one that smelled of blood and power. In a guard's office, Captain Morales studied the reports. 20 years on the job had left him numb to most of what Rikers threw at him, but this case gnawed at his gut. A dead Trinitario. A kid barely old enough to be here holding the blade. Delgado's name in blood. It was too neat, too cinematic. Real prison hits weren't usually that theatrical. They were fast, efficient, forgettable. He flipped through Vega's intake papers. The kid had no gang affiliations, no priors beyond the weapons charge. He looked like someone who should have been scared into line, not capable of slitting a man's throat. Morales lit a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign above his desk. Something didn't add up. Detective Mendez felt the same unease. She had spent the afternoon pulling Torres's file. Rafael Torres wasn't just a random inmate, he was a courier for the Trinitarios. He had connections to drug shipments in Washington Heights and rumors of payoffs to dirty officers. Killing him wasn't just violence, it was strategy. Someone had silenced him, and that someone wanted the blame pointed elsewhere. Mendez walked the tier, eyes sharp, ears open. Inmates hushed when she passed, some watching her with curiosity, others with hostility. Rikers had its own code: never talk to cops, never trust outsiders. But Mendez wasn't just any cop. She had built informants on the street, turned killers into snitches. She knew the right words could crack even the hardest shells. She stopped at Delgado's cell. He sat on his bunk, calm as ever, eyes unblinking as he looked at her. "You've been busy," she said. A faint smirk touched his lips. "Busy sitting here? You give me too much credit." "You know Torres," she pressed. "You know who wanted him gone." Delgado leaned forward, his tone low and deliberate. Everyone wanted Torres gone. He owed debts. He ran his mouth. He thought he was untouchable. His eyes flickered, the smallest betrayal of calculation. "But I'm not in the business of cleaning up other people's messes." Mendez studied him. Delgado didn't lie like most men. He told truths that led in the wrong direction. He was playing with her, dangling bait, waiting to see if she'd bite. Back in solitary, Vega's world was collapsing. Every meal tray came with whispered threats. Every glance through the small window in his door carried malice. Word had spread. He was the Trinitario killer. Whether he liked it or not, the gangs had marked him. On the fourth night, a note slid under his door. He picked it up with trembling fingers. 3 words, scrawled in pencil: "Stay alive tomorrow." Vega's heart pounded. He didn't know if it was a warning or a threat. But the handwriting, it looked like Delgado's. The next morning, Vega was released from solitary under administrative review. Guards escorted him back to the general population wing, where the dayroom was already alive with noise. The moment he stepped inside, silence fell. Dozens of eyes locked onto him. A Trinitario enforcer, broad-shouldered and scarred, stood up. His crew flanked him. "You got a lot of nerve walking back in here, kid," he growled. "Blood for blood. That's the rule." Vega froze. His mouth went dry. His body screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then Delgado moved. Slow. Controlled. He stood between Vega and the enforcer, his presence cutting the air like a blade. "This kid's under me," Delgado said, his voice low but firm. "Anyone touches him, they answer to me." The room buzzed. In Rikers, words like that were more dangerous than knives. The enforcer sneered. "He killed Torres. You think you can stop what's coming?" Delgado's eyes narrowed. "I don't think. I know." For a long moment, the room held its breath. Then the enforcer spat on the floor and sat down. The tension didn't vanish, but the immediate storm passed. Vega's legs shook. He whispered to Delgado later, "Why are you doing this?" Delgado leaned close, his voice so low only Vega could hear. "Because you're useful. And because they'll come harder next time." Detective Mendez sat in the observation booth above the dayroom, watching the exchange unfold on the monitors. She saw the way Delgado commanded the room without raising his voice. The way Vega clung to him like a lifeline. And the way the Trinitarios simmered with barely contained fury. This wasn't random. This was orchestration. Someone was pulling strings, and she suspected Delgado was holding the whole web in his hands. That night, chaos erupted. A fight broke out in the showers between 2 rival crews. Shanks flashed, blood spilled, guards scrambled. By the time the alarms silenced, 3 inmates were in the infirmary and 1 was barely clinging to life. Rumor spread that it wasn't about respect or debts or pride. It was about Torres. His death had left a vacuum and every gang wanted to fill it. In his cell, Delgado sharpened his makeshift blade and smiled faintly. Everything was going according to plan. Meanwhile, Vega couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, trying to piece it together. Why was he in the middle of this? Why had Delgado chosen him? And what would happen if the Trinitarios decided to stop waiting and strike? He didn't know it yet, but the next 48 hours would decide whether he lived or died. The storm was coming and everyone on the island felt it. Anthony Vega woke to the sound of boots pounding down the tier. Guards were conducting another shakedown, tossing cells, ripping apart mattresses, flipping over every scrap of contraband they could find. Vega sat on his bunk, hands trembling, praying they wouldn't find another weapon under his bed. His stomach churned with the memory of the last setup. This time, though, the guards moved past him. They weren't looking for shanks. They were looking for phones. Rumor said that Torres, before he died, had been running an illicit line of communication through a contraband cell phone. If true, it meant he wasn't just moving drugs inside Rikers, he was coordinating business on the outside. Someone had killed him to cut that line and the phone had vanished. And in a place like Rikers, a missing phone wasn't just a mystery. It was leverage. Detective Mendez pored over the prison's incident logs. The fight in the showers, the sudden flare of violence, the brewing gang war, it all pointed back to one man, Delgado. Yet nothing concrete tied him to Torres's murder. He hadn't been near the chapel corridor. No fingerprints. No DNA. Nothing but his name written in blood on the wall. It was too neat. Too clean. Too theatrical. She needed a crack, a weakness. So she went looking for one. Meanwhile, Delgado's influence spread like wildfire. Guards looked the other way when he walked the tier. Contraband flowed smoother through his channels than through official commissary. Even rival gangs who hated him respected the balance he enforced. Rikers was chaos, but Delgado was control. Anthony Vega felt the shift too. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. Under Delgado's shadow, inmates stopped harassing him. They even gave him nods of respect, though they were laced with menace. He knew it wasn't his respect, it was Delgado's, borrowed and dangerous. One afternoon in the yard, Delgado finally spoke of his design. "You think Torres died because of you?" Delgado asked, his eyes locked on Vegas. Vegas swallowed. "Didn't he?" Delgado shook his head. Torres was already dead the moment he stopped paying his debts. He had enemies everywhere. The only surprise was who struck first. He leaned closer. "But they made a mistake putting it on you. They thought you'd fold. Instead you belong to me. That makes you valuable." "Valuable for what?" Vega asked, his voice cracking. Delgado's lips curved into something between a smile and a warning. "You'll see soon enough." That night Vega was summoned. Two of Delgado's men led him down a dim corridor toward the laundry room. The machines roared, drowning out sound, while the heat and steam pressed against his skin. Delgado waited there, seated on a crate, calm as always. "Kid," Delgado said, "you want to survive? Then you're gonna help me. I need someone the gangs don't suspect. Someone clean. That's you." Vega's heart pounded. "Help you do what?" Delgado pulled a small object from his pocket, a cell phone no bigger than his palm wrapped in plastic. Vega's eyes widened. The missing phone. "This belonged to Torres," Delgado said. "On it are numbers, accounts, names that mean money and power. Everyone wants it. But I have it. And now so do you." He shoved the phone into Vega's trembling hands. Vega's breath caught. He knew what holding it meant. If the guards caught him, he'd disappear into solitary for years. If the Trinitarios found out, he'd be gutted before the night was over. "Why me?" Vega asked again, his voice breaking. Delgado's gaze was ice. "Because no one suspects you. Because if it's on me, the war explodes. On you? Nobody sees the move until it's too late." Vega stared at the phone, his pulse thundering in his ears. He wasn't just a pawn anymore. He was bait. Detective Mendez got her first break 2 days later. A confidential informant slipped her a note during a meeting in the Bronx. Torres was about to talk. He had a deal. Someone silenced him before he could flip. The information chilled her. Torres hadn't just been a gang courier. He'd been ready to turn witness, possibly against officers inside Rikers. That explained everything, the brutality of his death, the rush to pin it on someone else, the missing phone. If Delgado had it, he now held evidence that could collapse both gangs and corrupt officers. It wasn't just a prison murder anymore. It was a conspiracy. Back inside, Vega's nightmare deepened. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes on him. Every meal, every walk to the showers, every shuffle to the yard carried the weight of suspicion. He kept the phone hidden, terrified of touching it, terrified of losing it. One evening, as he lay in his bunk, a whisper came through the bars. "You're carrying something that ain't yours, kid." Vega sat up, heart hammering. Across the tier, the Trinitario enforcer smirked at him. "You think we don't know? You think Delgado can protect you forever? Torres's phone belongs to us. And if you don't hand it over, we'll carve the truth out of your skin. Vega's throat went dry. The phone burned in his mattress like a live grenade. The next morning, violence erupted again. A brawl between Trinitarios and Latin kings turned the cafeteria into a battlefield. Trays flew, fists cracked, blades flashed. Guards stormed in, swinging batons, dragging bodies. In the chaos, Vega saw the enforcer staring straight at him, lips mouthing the words, "We're coming." By nightfall, Vega couldn't breathe. He pulled the phone from its hiding place, staring at it under the dim light. Every number on it could mean life or death. Every secret inside could burn him alive. He thought about smashing it, flushing it, ending the nightmare. But then he heard Delgado's voice in his head, "You're mine now." And he realized he couldn't escape. Not anymore. Detective Mendez filed her latest report. The pieces were aligning. Delgado wasn't just consolidating power inside Rikers. He was leveraging Torres's secrets to expand his empire outside. The phone was the key, and she suspected Vega was holding it. But proving it inside a prison ruled by corruption and gangs would be nearly impossible. Still, she knew one thing. If she didn't move fast, the island would erupt into a war that wouldn't stay contained. That night, as Vega tried to sleep, his cell door creaked. He bolted upright. Two shadows slipped inside, men masked with shirts over their faces, blades glinting in the dark. "Where's the phone?" one hissed. Before Vega could answer, the first blade slashed, grazing his arm. He screamed, scrambling back, clutching his mattress. The phone fell out, clattering to the floor. The men lunged. And then the door slammed open. Delgado stood there, eyes cold, blade in his hand. The shadows froze. For a heartbeat, the cell was pure tension, violence coiled and ready to strike. Delgado's voice cut through the air. "He's under me. Touch him again and you don't leave this tier alive." The men hesitated, then backed away, retreating into the corridor. Vega's chest heaved, blood dripping from his arm. Delgado knelt, picked up the phone and held it up between them. "This," Delgado said, his voice a whisper of steel, "isn't just power. It's survival. And now, kid, you're in deeper than you'll ever crawl out." The air in the interview room was stale, thick with the residue of too many confessions and too many lies. A single bulb hummed overhead. Anthony Vega sat shackled to the steel table, his arms still wrapped in the makeshift bandage from the slash in his cell. He stared at the mirrored glass across from him, knowing there were eyes behind it. Detective Carla Mendez stepped inside, a file tucked under her arm. She dropped it on the table, the thud louder than it should have been. "Sit up, Anthony," she said. "You want to live, you're going to have to start talking." Vega straightened, his throat dry. "I told you already, I didn't kill Torres." "I believe you," Mendez said, pulling out a chair. "But belief doesn't save lives. Information does." She leaned forward. "That phone you kicked down the hall, it was empty. You know that, don't you?" Vega froze. He thought of Delgado's razor splitting the back of the device. The card slipped into his sleeve. His skin prickled. "I don't know anything," he lied. Mendez studied him. "You're in over your head, kid. I can see it. Delgado's using you. The gangs want you dead. And the guards," she paused. "Let's just say not all of them wear the uniform for the right reasons." Vega's chest tightened. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Choose," Mendez said. "You either drown with Delgado or you help me pull him under first." Meanwhile, Delgado sat in his cell as if the island wasn't boiling around him. He leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed, listening to the echoes of voices and boots and distant alarms. To him, every sound was a line in a script he'd written months ago. His lieutenant, a wiry man named Cruz, slid close to the bars. "Word is, the cops got the phone." Delgado didn't open his eyes. "Good." Cruz frowned. "Good?" "They'll think it's over," Delgado said, finally looking at him. "They'll think they've won. That's when people make mistakes." Cruz hesitated. "And the kid?" Delgado's lips curved. "He's carrying the only piece that matters. As long as he breathes, I still own the game." In the observation booth above the interview room, Captain Morales leaned against the glass, arms crossed. He watched Vega fidget under Mendez's questions, sweat beading on the kid's forehead. "He's hiding something," Morales muttered. "Of course he is," Mendez replied through her earpiece. "He's been dropped into the middle of a war and chained to the most dangerous man on this island. But he's still salvageable. I can turn him." "You'd better," Morales said. "Because if Delgado finds out you're trying, the kid won't last the week." Hours later, Vega lay awake in his new cell, isolated from Delgado's tier for his safety. But isolation in Rikers was never truly safe. He heard whispers through the vents, footsteps that lingered too long, laughter that didn't belong to the night. He turned on his side and felt the tiny card still sewn into his sleeve. It was no bigger than a fingernail, but it carried the weight of his life. He thought about flushing it, destroying it, ending this nightmare. But he couldn't. Because even in his fear, Delgado's words echoed in his head. "You're mine now." Sleep finally came in jagged pieces. And with it, dreams of blood, locked doors, and a name written in red. The next day, chaos erupted again. A Trinitario lieutenant was found hanging in his cell, a bedsheet noose around his neck. Officially, it was suicide. Unofficially, it was a message. The gangs blamed each other. Whispers swirled that Delgado had ordered it, tying up loose ends, sending warnings without lifting a blade himself. The prison went on lockdown. Cells slammed shut. Tension thickened like smoke. Detective Mendez stormed into Morales' office, slamming the report on his desk. "Another body. This doesn't end until we cut the head off." Morales rubbed his temples. "You think Delgado killed him?" "I think Delgado doesn't kill unless it benefits him," Mendez said. "And right now, every death, every riot, every whisper pushes him higher. He's building something. And the kid is the key." Morales looked up sharply. "Then you'd better keep the kid alive." That night, Vega was escorted back to general population. He didn't want to go. He begged to stay in protective custody. But the guards laughed. "Protective costs money, kid. You got money?" So back he went. When he stepped into the day room, silence fell again. The enforcer wasn't there, locked down after the chapel corridor incident, but his crew was. They watched Vega like wolves circling a wounded deer. And then Delgado stood. Calm. Silent. His presence wrapped around the room like barbed wire. Vega's stomach twisted. He realized in that moment just how trapped he was. The cops wanted him to flip. The gangs wanted him dead. And Delgado wanted him alive, but only as long as he was useful. There was no escape. Later, as lights dimmed and the tear quieted, Vega found a note under his mattress. His hands shook as he unfolded it. "Midnight. Laundry. Come alone. D." He felt sick. He knew he shouldn't go. He knew it was a trap, whether by Delgado, the gangs, or the guards. But he also knew one thing. Ignoring the Reaper wasn't an option. So when midnight came, Vega slipped into the shadows and followed the path toward the laundry room. The machines roared, drowning out sound. Steam filled the air. Delgado stood waiting, his silhouette blurred by the haze. "You have something I need," Delgado said. Vega's pulse spiked. "The card?" Delgado stepped closer, eyes glinting. "You've been holding it for me. Now it's time to give it back." Before Vega could respond, the door slammed shut behind him. He spun around. 2 guards stood there, not in uniform but in plain clothes. Dirty cops. Their eyes gleamed with greed. "Hand it over, kid," one growled. "Delgado's done playing. It's ours now." Vega's heart pounded. Delgado's expression didn't change. He didn't move. He just watched. The guards advanced. Vega's mind screamed. He reached into his sleeve. The tiny card slid into his palm. The guards leaned closer, hungry, desperate. And then Vega made a choice. Instead of handing it over, he clenched it in his fist and shouted, "Detective Mendez. I have it." The walls seemed to explode. Hidden officers poured into the room, radios crackling, weapons raised. Mendez herself stormed through the door, her badge flashing in the fluorescent light. The dirty guards froze, betrayed. Delgado stood still, a faint smile tugging at his lips. And in that moment, Vega realized the terrifying truth. Delgado had planned this too. The reckoning. The laundry room held its breath after the raid, a box full of steam and swallowed shouts. The plainclothes guards were on the floor in cuffs. The uniformed ones stood in a loose ring, breathing like runners at the end of a race they hadn't trained for. Detective Carla Mendez took the tiny memory card from Anthony Vega's shaking palm and sealed it in an evidence pouch with hands that did not shake at all. Delgado watched it vanish into procedure the way he watched everything, like a man measuring the distance to a far shore he intended to reach without getting wet. His smile was nothing and everything at once. "Move them," Captain Morales said. Separate tiers. Double escort. They pulled Vega out first. As he passed, Delgado didn't look at him, and somehow that was the clearest acknowledgement yet. They were finished for now, stitched together by a thread neither of them could cut. In the corridor, Mendez fell in beside Vega. He looked smaller under the fluorescent lights, younger than the 19 he'd carried, like a shield too thin to stop anything. "You did good," she said. He swallowed, then nodded because words felt dangerous. Listen to me, she added, voice low. You are not the first kid to get dropped into a storm. The difference is you still have a chance to walk out. I can't promise you clean. I can promise you alive. Vega's gaze slid to the black dome of a camera, then back to the floor tiles that knew more secrets than anyone on the island. What if he doesn't let me? Then you make me the person who does, she said. But that only works if you tell me everything. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between them made a shape that both recognized as a beginning. They moved him to a different unit with doors that sounded heavier, and the quiet, watchful men inside did not laugh when he walked past. A toothpick-chewing officer posted at the end of the tier nodded once like a coin paid into a machine. Down another hall, Delgado sat alone in a cell that smelled like fresh bleach and old decisions. Cruz materialized at the bars and slipped a folded piece of paper through the slot. The writing on it was tight, numbers marching like soldiers. This is the list, Cruz whispered. The ones who took money, the ones who turned cameras, the ones who moved bags. Delgado didn't touch the paper. Does our friend at the top still sign work orders? Every week, Cruz said. He thinks the walls are his. They're everyone's, Delgado murmured. He left the paper where it lay. Burn that after you memorize it. Cruz blinked, then retrieved the note, slid it into his mouth, chewed until it was a gray paste and swallowed. It was obscene and practical, which was to say it was perfect for Rikers. When Cruz was gone, Delgado closed his eyes. The island hummed around him, soft as electricity. In a broom closet office that had been upgraded to temporary war room, Mendez and Morales sat over the memory card like two surgeons deciding where to make the first cut. A tech from one police plaza bent over a laptop and worked his careful magic. Encrypted, he said after a moment. But cheap. I've seen better locks on vending machines. Don't break it, Mendez said. Open it. He smiled without looking up. Yes, ma'am. They waited. The screen filled with file names, then spreadsheets. Columns of numbers. Dates. Small notes that meant nothing, and then, suddenly, everything. Morales leaned in. Those entries, he said, finger hovering over a line. That's the chapel corridor. Twice a week. 30 minutes. Work order authorizations. Rourke, Valet, Meng. Those are my guys. Not all yours, Mendez said quietly. There were deposit slips. There were routing numbers tied to shell businesses with names made to be forgotten. Queens Lighting Solutions, East River Services, Triborough Industrial. Small amounts, then larger ones, then a leap that wasn't a leap at all when you knew where money liked to hide. A consultancy retainer for a city law firm that handled union disputes and disciplinary appeals. A deputy warden's initials repeated like a ghost in the metadata. Morales cursed once and trailed off. Heller, he said. It's Heller. And he's not the top, Mendez said. He's the bridge. The tech translated the numbers into a picture and the picture into warrants. Before dawn, supervisors received summonses they'd never expected to see. 2 officers called in sick and did not show up anywhere a phone could find them. An assistant warden shut his office door and made 3 calls in a row he would later deny. At 9 in the morning, they arrested Officer Rourke inside a briefing room he had chosen because it felt official enough to protect him from bad luck. He didn't resist. He didn't look shocked. He looked exactly like a man who had believed the lock on the blind spot could stay broken forever. Deputy Warden Heller was pulled from a budget meeting and handcuffed at the end of a conference table strewn with pie charts. He tried to smile down the room. No one smiled back. Captain, Heller said when Morales stepped in, voice smooth as an elevator pitch. Let's not embarrass the department. The department did that to itself, Morales said. What are the charges? Heller asked Mendez. She read them cleanly. Bribery. Tampering with evidence. Hindering prosecution. Conspiracy in aid of racketeering. Racketeering? Heller repeated, a note of amusement he had not earned. You think this is the mob? She didn't blink. I think this is the island. It's worse. They processed the men with the efficiency that old machinery can still find when it cares to. Meanwhile, the island woke up mean. Word traveled faster than handcarts and faster than radios. Rumor, the blind spot had been bought and sold. Rumor, the blind spot had been seized. Rumor, the blind spot now belonged to someone who would never admit it. On the dayroom floor, the Trinitarios gathered tight around a table stained by 1,000 cups of instant coffee. Their enforcer was in lockup and his second-in-command had been found hanged in a cell that was supposed to be suicide-proof. The air around them was brittle. What now? A younger man asked, eyes darting to the guards. Now we wait, the elder said. Not for the cops. For him. Him who? The one who writes his name with other people's blood. If he meant Delgado, he didn't use the nickname. Names held weight on the island that would crush you if you tried to carry them wrong. Vega sat on his bunk in the new unit, back pressed to cinder block that had learned to outlast backs. His sleeve was empty now, the card it had protected gone into evidence, and yet his arm still felt heavier there as if a ghost of responsibility remained. An officer delivered a note and did not wait to find out what it said. The handwriting was careful as a priest's. Today you decide who you are. He turned the paper over. Blank. He considered tearing it up and dropping the halves into the stainless steel toilet where so many plans went to rot. He folded it once and slid it under the mattress instead. It was either a threat or a promise, and neither deserved to be flushed. By mid-afternoon, the city had a problem it preferred to call a development. The district attorney, flanked by a low wall of microphones and glass towers, announced an anti-corruption initiative on Rikers. The words were stern and bland in the way press conference words always were. But there were details that mattered. An independent monitor would review use of force incidents. Overtime audits would be conducted by auditors whose job had previously consisted mostly of coffee and PowerPoint. The U.S. Attorney's Office had agreed to partner. In a federal building thick with escalators and thin smiles, a prosecutor with a neat part and an unnatural tan told Carla Mendez that her case would benefit from the kind of charge that made reputations. Conspiracy under color of law. She replied that her case would benefit from not being slow-walked to death. We'll coordinate, he said. You'll share, she said. He agreed to both and meant one. Delgado's attorney arrived on the island at dusk, a man whose suits looked like a hedge fund and whose eyes looked like a hungry street. He met his client in a room engineered to be forgettable. You've made friends, the lawyer said, flipping through the complaint. I've made options, Delgado replied. There's a difference. They want you on Torres and a dozen other incidents, the lawyer said. They want an enhancement that sticks you to the wall until the wall crumbles. They also want your friends. In uniform and out. Delgado considered the observation camera like a man examining weather patterns. What do I get if I give them what they think they want? Transfer, the lawyer said. You're hot here. The city wants you gone. Give the feds enough, they'll take you to a place that looks like order and smells like money. MDC, a private box in the desert. They'll call it protective. It'll be a leash. I don't wear leashes, Delgado said. You wear whatever buys you daylight, the lawyer said. Daylight buys you time. Time buys you the thing you're always buying. What's that? Another move. They spoke in the language of bargaining, which was also the language of survival. The lawyer left with a retainer as thick as a fist and a list that would not be written down. Mendez stood at the fence and watched the sun turn the East River into a strip of metal. Morales came to stand beside her. Neither needed to say what the evening air already suggested. The day had gone their way, but days were like dice. They rolled until you remembered who owned the table. Get him off this island, Morales said. I will, Mendez said. But he's not the goal. He's the map. Maps lie, he said. Not if you read what's missing, she said. The transport moved just before midnight. It was quiet the way thunderstorms are quiet in the second before they break. 2 vans. 4 sedans. 8 officers whose names would never make the paper unless something went wrong. Vega sat cuffed in the second row of the first van. Delgado sat in the first row of the second one. They did not see each other. They did not need to. The route went off-island, down along the water where the city looks like its own postcard, then under the shadow of a bridge that had watched more secrets than any witness who ever took an oath. Halfway across a dark stretch with a warehouse on one side and a public park that smelled like old rain on the other. The forward sedan slowed to avoid a delivery truck idling at the curb. The delivery truck did not belong there. Delivery trucks often do not. The first pop wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of something metal clashing with tire rubber, a strip with teeth. The first van swerved, fought, regained. The second rolled over it a beat later, the driver too good to panic and too human to be perfect. Somewhere up ahead, a siren argued with itself about whether to turn on. The delivery truck's back door rolled up. Men stepped out that no one would admit knowing later. They wore hats you couldn't remember and moved like they'd rehearsed until the rehearsal replaced sleep. The fight was quick and close and mostly silent, as if everyone involved had made a pact with noise to keep it out of this. Delgado's van braked hard and went sideways into a kiss with a light pole. The officer riding shotgun cursed a saint he didn't believe in and unholstered with fingers already bruising. In the other van, Vega looked at his knees and told them not to shake. The attack should have worked. It had the blueprint and the motive and the useful inside whispers that make bad things look inevitable. It did not work for one reason: the wrong person had read the map of the night. Across the street, two unmarked cars that had not been on the manifest and had not been introduced to the manifest's friends lit up. Agents neither city nor state nor island got out with the efficient impatience of people who had gotten the call before the plan did. They weren't here for pride. They were here for process. The truck's men did not stay to negotiate. The ones still standing faded into alleys that had been waiting for them. The ones who fell stayed where physics put them. One officer bled from an ear and said he was fine, like men say they are fine when being wrong is less dangerous than being honest. Mendez appeared and began doing the thing the night required, pulling everyone into the version of events that would keep them alive tomorrow. When she reached Delgado's van, he was already leaning forward to catch her eye. "You're welcome," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For not letting them take your witness," he said, chin flicking toward the other van. "You set this up," she said. "I set everything up," he replied. "Why start pretending I didn't now?" She held the door and stared until he blinked. "You gave me Heller," she said. "You gave me a flair to draw out every dirty veteran who thought the blind spot was theirs to sell. You gave me an attack you knew I could stop, so I would owe you something I don't believe in owing." He smiled, tired and true. "And what did I take?" "You took the choice out of the kid's hands," she said. Again. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask for thanks. The knight took a breath and let it out slowly. By sunrise, 3 men had been charged federally, and a deputy warden had made bail he shouldn't have been able to afford. Rourke sat in a small room without windows and talked to a man who didn't share his cigarettes. He said he'd sign. He asked for a deal. He asked for his wife to be told something gentle. He asked for a kind of forgiveness he would never name. The memory card gave up more than graft. It gave up patterns, visits to a Bronx garage that was not a garage, lunch tabs at a restaurant that served food no one there ordered, a series of cash deposits under the alias of a man who had died 2 years earlier in a motorcycle accident that left behind no motorcycle. Morales stared at the board where Mendez had drawn lines that looped back on themselves like ropes. "This goes past the island?" he said, not asking. "It always did," she said. They moved Vega into a secure ward at Bellevue, which was a kind of joke because there are fewer secure places in a city than its hospitals. He slept 12 hours for the first time since a judge had said the word remand. When he woke, there was a tray on the rolling table with eggs in a shape that tried to look like eggs and toast that had died doing its job. He ate like someone might change their mind and take it away. Mendez sat beside him and told him the truth as far as she could stand to. "We can put you under," she said. "Change your name. Give you new streets and new coffee and a job that doesn't require you to look over your shoulder more than anyone in America has to." He listened. He nodded. He stared at the TV mounted high on the wall where a local morning show anchor smiled at a charity story like she didn't know the names that had been spoken overnight. "What about him?" he asked. "Delgado," she said. He didn't say the name, but he didn't have to. "He'll be moved," she said. "Brooklyn. Then federal. He thinks that's his way out." "He's wrong." "Is he?" Vega asked softly. "He's been right about everything since I met him." "He's been right about you," she said. "That's not the same thing." The week after the attack, the city drafted new press releases and cleanly worded memos that made certain men calm enough to eat lunch in the middle of the day again. The island tried to adjust its weight and failed, clanging against its chains like a boat that had been tied up badly. A federal grand jury asked questions that made expensive lawyers sweat through linen. Delgado waited. In the waiting he did not waste time. He sent small words out into the world. They returned to him as larger ones. He learned who had run and where, who had stayed and why, who had betrayed whom and for how much. He learned that Cruz had been picked up on a parole violation that had not existed until it did. He learned that one of the men who had ambushed the vans had turned up face down in a canal with his pockets full of rocks old as the city. He learned too that Anthony Vega was still alive. That mattered more than it should have. On a gray Friday that felt like it wanted to be a different month, they brought Delgado to the courthouse in Brooklyn. The holding cell downstairs had walls with gouges carved by men who had needed to leave a mark. The fluorescent lights hummed like insects that had adapted too well. He closed his eyes because sometimes the only choice is whether you stare at the box or refuse to dignify it. A clatter across the hall, a guard's curse, the shuffle of cuffs. Vega was being moved at the same time, paperwork collision, coincidence that wasn't. He saw Delgado between bodies and steel, and something in his chest tighten like a fist. "You kept me breathing," he said quietly through the noise. Delgado turned his head a fraction. You kept my piece on the board, he replied. You used me, Vega said, and didn't bother to put question marks where they didn't belong. I made you unkillable, Delgado said. Until now. Until now. Vega repeated. You have to pick, Delgado said. I can't pick for you anymore. There was no drama in the way he said it, which made it feel truer than anything Vega had heard in a year. A sergeant barked and the bodies moved again, and the moment was done. Upstairs, in a courtroom that had seen promises die in 2 languages for 50 years, Delgado stood before a magistrate who had once been a public defender too good at his job to be allowed to continue. The charges were read. The penalties were sketched like a mountain on a map. The lawyer spoke in numbers and conditions and phrases that turned knives into spoons. Down the hall, in a smaller room painted a color that must once have been called cheerful, Vega answered questions about what he had seen and what he had been made to do. The stenographer tapped the weird music of the law. A prosecutor asked if he knew he'd be testifying against a man some called Reaper. I know what he calls himself, Vega said. And I know what he made me. What did he make you? The prosecutor asked, leaning forward the way schoolteachers lean before they decide on detention. Alive, Vega said. And dangerous. Dangerous to whom? To anyone who thinks I'm still a victim, he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. They gave him paperwork thick enough to stop a bullet and a phone with one number pre-programmed and a hotel keycard with a brand on it that made everything inside look more expensive than it was. They told him to rest while better lives were arranged. That night, he stood at a window that looked like a television screen and watched the city pretend it had ever been simple. The glass showed him his reflection as a ghost layered over traffic and the bright white of another man's office. He thought of the boy who had come off the bus with shackles chafing his ankles. He thought of the name written in blood on a wall. He thought of a note that had told him to decide. He turned the phone in his hand and opened the settings menu to check a thing no one had taught him to check. The contacts list was empty except for the number the government wanted him to use. The call history was clean. That wasn't what he was looking for. He looked at the SIM tray. He smiled in spite of himself. It wasn't what Delgado would have done, it was what Vega had learned to do. There were 2 words etched tiny in the tray plastic, a manufacturer's vanity. He had seen them before in a list he'd memorized with trembling hands when the laundry room had been a battlefield. VX tray. A code buried in parts. A breadcrumb a man could only drop if he expected someone to follow. He tapped the keypad and entered a number he had never written down. The call rang twice and died like something underwater. A minute later, a text arrived from a number labeled unknown. You're ready. He typed back. I'm done with your games. Another pause. Then good. Make your own. The next morning, a guard in a federal facility brought Delgado a breakfast burrito that tasted like cardboard and permission. The guard's name tag said Ortiz. The guard's eyes said he had put years in that no one could take back. Ortiz lingered a second too long and then didn't. Across town, Heller's attorney held a press conference where he said the words, witch hunt, and disgruntled, and politically motivated, in an order he hoped might be new enough to trick the old ears. 2 hours later, a reporter released a story about a Bronx garage with no cars and a bank account tied to a woman Heller had once called from a phone the city paid for. The quotes the reporter included were obvious. The part that mattered wasn't. That afternoon, an assistant district attorney who had practiced saying no for a living said yes to a plea deal that would take Rourke off 1 case and deliver him to 5 more. The news broke at 4:17 p.m. The Correction Officers Union released a statement at 4:30 that mentioned due process 3 times and cooperation, not at all. At 6:50, a man with a stack of takeout boxes buzzed into a building that had security good enough for the brochure. No one stopped him because stopping him would have required choosing to see him. He rode the elevator to a floor where the carpet was twice as thick as it needed to be. He knocked on a door that opened for men with the right name. The man behind the door was not Heller. He had a title that sounded like responsibility and a bank account that believed otherwise. He wore loafers softer than apologies. He smiled at the delivery boy and fumbled with a wallet that held cards whose colors were designed to signal status to people who cared about that kind of thing. He never got to the tip. The takeout boxes were empty. The knock at the door hadn't been about food. It had been about the kind of message the city preferred to leave out of indictments. He didn't die. He didn't even go to the hospital. But the photos that arrived later, quietly without signatures, did their work. He resigned over a weekend. The paper said he wanted to spend more time with family. Sometimes the old lies are the only ones that still function. 3 weeks later the island felt different. Not better. That would have required math the city never learned outside high school. But different. The chapel corridor's camera stopped going dark. Over time dropped. So did assaults, briefly, because even violence needs time to reorganize. The Trinitarios bowed their heads and lifted their eyes, which is how organizations survive. Delgado's name was not whispered as much, not because people forgot it, but because names that heavy bruise mouths. Mendez did the thing good cops do after small wins. She kept moving. She sat with families who had lost sons to a place where loss can be administrative. She fought with a lawyer in a hallway and won with a sentence no longer than a handshake. She went home sometimes before midnight. She learned the names of the people who vacuumed her office because the world is cruelest when it lets you forget. Morales turned in his papers and then unturned them, then turned them in again. The department would have a ceremony for him because that's what departments do to keep from looking at themselves too long. He wasn't leaving because he had to. He was leaving because at some point the mop becomes a relic, and relics belong in altar cases, not in corridors that flood every second Tuesday. Vega learned to talk to a counselor without flinching. He learned to sleep with one ear not quite open. He learned to order a coffee that didn't taste like a metal tray. He walked streets in another city where the sky looked like permission and the pigeons looked like they knew universal secrets people were too proud to ask about. He didn't use the phone number the government gave him much. He used other numbers for other things. A job that paid cash, a landlord who preferred it, a mechanic who didn't ask why a young man with no car wanted to know which garages in town never saw police. He did not become Delgado. He did not become the boy from the bus. He became the version of himself that the island had shown him in a mirror he wouldn't have chosen to stand before. He kept his promises by never making them out loud. One night, months after the ambulance sirens had stopped echoing in his dreams, he woke to a news alert that crawled across his phone in letters that always felt too casual for the weight they carried. An inmate at a federal detention center had been found dead in his cell. The article used the word, suspected suicide, because the law liked to wrap certainty in bubble wrap. His name was not Delgado. The name was a lieutenant in a crew that had thought it could replace Heller's Bridge with one of its own. The method wasn't in the story. The comment section was. It said what comment sections always say, which is nothing that matters. 2 days later, another alert. A corrections contractor in Queens had been arrested for falsifying invoices tied to camera maintenance on a municipal island. The article's photo showed a man trying to cover his face with a baseball cap that wanted no part of it. The prosecutor quoted in the piece was not Mendez. She was busy. In a coffee shop where the barista knew his order but not his name, Vega read the second article twice. He looked out a window at a street where nothing in particular was happening, which is the definition of peace in a city that has to be at war with itself to function. He put his phone down and watched a woman tie her child's shoe, double knot, then kiss the top of the kid's head like a seal. He didn't smile. But whatever the opposite of frowning is when you aren't sure you're allowed to do either, he did that. 3 months after the laundry room, a body was found under a bridge in the Bronx. No name in the first-day report. No details beyond male, mid-30s, no ID. The second-day report offered a name that had never been important to the public. The third-day report offered speculation connecting that name to a transport attack that had gone wrong on a night the city had already decided to forget. An editorial in a paper that still printed on actual paper asked whether the Reaper had been behind bars all along. It suggested that perhaps the island was the killer and men were just the fingerprints it left. It suggested reform. Reform is a word articles use when they have run out of faith and need to end anyway. In a facility with federal air and institutional beige, Delgado received a letter with no return address. The inside contained a single phrase, written in block letters without flourish. You told me to move my piece. He didn't laugh. He didn't frown. He stared long enough to make the paper think it had a chance of matching, then burned it with a lighter he had meant to surrender 3 searches ago. He rubbed his thumb over the ash on the stainless sink until it turned the metal a little darker. The next morning he requested a meeting with federal agents. He offered information he hadn't had to offer before. They thought it meant he was finally learning his lesson. It meant he had counted the bars and the steps and the angle of sunlight on the corridor and decided the lesson was still his to write. The city went on being itself. That is both an indictment and a love letter. Rikers did what islands do. It kept being separate until the water around it pretended to be a bridge. The blind spots camera worked every day for 90 days in a row, which was a record someone quietly pinned to a corkboard and no one noticed. Mendez walked the chapel corridor one evening without purpose beyond gravity. She paused by the maintenance door. The lock had been replaced. The lock would always be replaced. The word on the wall had been painted over. In the right light she could still see the faintest halo of letters no paint would ever truly forgive. She touched the cinder block and felt its cool indifference. Then she turned and kept going, because nothing important ever happens when you stand still and wait for a building to apologize. On a Sunday morning that smelled like the bakery 2 blocks away, Vega sat on a stoop and watched a kid ride a 2-big bike in circles that somehow didn't fall. He answered a text from a number he didn't recognize because sometimes you have to say yes to the first thing and see if the second thing becomes what you needed. He told a woman named Lila he could start Tuesday. He didn't ask what her last name was. He didn't tell her his. Across a river, in a cell that measured him the way a tailor measures a suit he has already been paid for, Delgado lay on his back and listened to footsteps he could identify from their weight. He remembered a boy staring at a ceiling certain it would fall. He remembered writing nothing and letting others write his name for him. He remembered a line he would never say out loud because putting it into the air would make it thinner. In the end, the island did not change, not in the way documentaries prefer to say things change when the credits roll. What changed were the people who had to keep living near it. A captain retired and slept badly for a while and then better. A detective broke a ring that had learned to call itself normal. A deputy warden learned how quickly doors open and close when money changes hands too many times. A lawyer bought a car more expensive than success required and drove it out of town. A kid became something nobody could quite name without offending either optimism or experience. They said the killer was behind bars. 3 months later, another man died in a place where cameras worked and still saw nothing useful. They said the conspiracy had been cornered. 6 months later, a contract that would have rebroken the blind spot failed by 1 vote because someone who wasn't supposed to show up did. They said the story was over. It wasn't. Stories like this never are. They are chapters without the courtesy of titles. If you made it here, you know how dark the truth gets when it's left alone. If you think this one was intense, you're not ready for the next, so don't just watch from a distance. Subscribe, stay close, and keep your eyes open. The island isn't done with us yet.